Welcome to Speak Easy English. Today's story is about greed, giving, peace, and the power of generosity. In a large town at the meeting of two rivers, there lived the richest man anyone had ever known. His name was Seth Thunraj. He owned the biggest house, the most land, and more gold than he could ever count. From his tall windows, he could see half the town, and almost everything he saw belonged to him. People said that Seth Thunraj could buy anything in the world. But there was one thing he had never bought, and that was happiness. For Seth Thunraj had a sickness of the heart. It was not a sickness that any doctor could cure. It was the sickness of greed. He loved his money more than anything else in the world. He counted his gold coins every single night, late into the darkness, his eyes shining as he stacked them into tall, glittering towers. But he never gave a single coin to anyone. Not to the poor, not to the hungry, not even to his own old servants who had served him faithfully for 40 years. When a beggar came to his great gate, Seth Thunraj would send him away with harsh words. "Go and work," he would shout. "Why should I give you my hard-earned money? Every coin I own, I keep." When the temple asked for help to feed the poor during the cold winter, he refused. When his neighbor's house burned down and the family had nothing, he locked his doors and turned away. The whole town knew him as the richest man and also as the hardest heart. Because of his greed, Seth Thunraj was a very lonely man. He had no friends, for he trusted no one and shared with no one. He had no family near him, for his children had grown tired of his cold ways and moved far away. He lived alone in his great mansion with only his servants, who feared him but did not love him. At night, surrounded by all his gold, he often felt a strange and heavy emptiness in his chest. But he did not understand it. "I have everything," he would tell himself. "How can a man who has everything feel that something is missing?" The years passed, and Seth Thunraj grew old. His hair turned white, and his hands began to shake. One cold winter, he fell very ill. A high fever burned through his body, and for many days he lay in his great bed, weak and helpless. His servants called for the finest doctors in the land. The doctors came, examined him, and gave him medicine. But money, for the first time in his life, could not give Seth Thunraj what he needed most. As he lay sick, something strange happened. None of his servants stayed by his side out of love. They brought his food and his medicine because it was their duty, but they did not sit with him, or hold his hand, or speak kind words to comfort him. There was no one in all the world who truly cared whether he lived or died. And in the long, lonely nights of his illness, Seth Thunraj began to understand the emptiness he had felt for so many years. One night, when his fever was at its worst, Seth Thunraj heard the sound of laughter drifting in through his window. It was a warm, happy sound, the sound of a family enjoying one another's company. Slowly, painfully, the old man rose from his bed and looked out into the night. Across the road, in a small and humble hut, he saw a poor family gathered around a tiny fire. They had almost nothing. Their clothes were thin, and their meal was only a little bread. Yet they were laughing together, sharing their small food, their faces glowing with warmth and love. Seth Thunraj stared at that poor family for a long time, and a great pain filled his heart. "They have nothing," he whispered to himself, "and yet they have everything. And I have everything, and yet I have nothing." For the first time in many years, the rich old man wept. He wept for all the lonely years, for all the cold words, for all the kindness he had never given. He understood, at last, that he had spent his whole life collecting gold, and had forgotten to collect what truly mattered. That night, in his weakness and his sorrow, Seth Thunraj made a decision. "If I live through this illness," he promised himself, "I will spend whatever days I have left learning to give." I have wasted so much time. But perhaps it is not too late to learn the most important lesson of all. Slowly, Seth Thunraj recovered from his fever. And when he was strong enough to walk again, the people of the town saw something they could scarcely believe. The richest and hardest man in the town walked out of his great gate, not to count his land, but to visit the poor family in the little hut across the road. He carried with him warm blankets, good food, and a bag of gold coins. He knocked gently on their door. The poor family was frightened at first, for they knew his cruel reputation. But Seth Thunraj spoke to them with soft and humble words. "I have been a foolish old man," he said. "For my whole life, I have kept everything for myself, and it brought me nothing but loneliness. Please, allow me to share with you. And please, teach me how you can be so happy with so little." The family welcomed him in. They shared their tiny fire and their small bread with him, and the old man felt a warmth in his heart that all his gold had never given him. From that day on, Seth Thunraj became a changed man. He began to give, and the more he gave, the more his heavy heart grew light. He opened his great storehouses and gave grain to the hungry. He built a school so that poor children could learn to read and write. He built a hospital where the sick could be treated without paying. When the cold winter came, he gave warm blankets and firewood to every poor family in the town. He sought out the very beggars he had once chased from his gate, and now he sat with them and shared his food. A wonderful change came over the old man. The strange emptiness in his chest disappeared completely. The loneliness that had haunted him for so many years melted away. For now, wherever Seth Thunraj walked, people smiled at him and blessed him. Children ran to greet him. The old servants who had once feared him now loved him truly and cared for him with all their hearts. The man who had once been the loneliest in the town became the most beloved. The news of Seth Thunraj's great change spread far beyond the town. It traveled along the rivers and across the roads, until at last it reached the distant city where his own children lived. Many years before, his son and daughter had left him, unable to bear his cold and greedy ways. They had not spoken to their father in a very long time, for there had been only harsh words and locked doors between them. When his son, a grown man now named Rohan, heard that his father had become a kind and generous man, beloved by his whole town, he could not believe it. "This cannot be the same man," Rohan said. "My father never gave anyone a single coin, but the stories kept coming, of the school for poor children, of the free hospital, of the old man who now shared his food with beggars." At last, full of doubt and old pain, Rohan decided to travel back to his childhood town to see the truth with his own eyes. When Rohan arrived, he found his father in the town square, surrounded by laughing children, handing out warm bread and gentle words. The hard, cold man he remembered was gone. When Seth Thunraj saw his son, he stopped, and his face filled with sorrow and hope all at once. Slowly, he walked to Rohan and took his hands. "My son," he said, his voice trembling, "I do not deserve your forgiveness. I spent your whole childhood loving my money more than I loved you. I was blind, and I drove you away. I have learned, too late, what truly matters in this life. I am so sorry. I have missed you every single day." Rohan looked into his father's eyes, and he saw that the change was real. All the anger he had carried for so many years began to melt away. "Father," he whispered, and the two men embraced for the first time in many years, both of them weeping. The greed that had once torn the family apart had finally been replaced by love, and the family was made whole again. Seth Thunraj's daughter came too, with the grandchildren he had never known. The great mansion, which had stood so cold and silent for so long, was suddenly filled with laughter and the running feet of children. The old man who had once sat alone counting his gold now, spent his evenings telling stories to his grandchildren by the fire. All my gold, he would think, looking at them, could never have bought a single moment of this. And I almost lost it forever. One evening, a young man came to Seth Thunraj, puzzled by all that he had seen. Sethji, he said, I do not understand. You are giving away the fortune you spent your whole life collecting. Soon you will have far less gold than before. How can you smile so much while your treasure grows smaller? Seth Thunraj laughed gently, a warm and happy laugh. My son, he said, let me tell you the lesson I learned too late, but thankfully, not too late entirely. For 70 years I believed that wealth was something you keep. I was wrong. Wealth that you only keep is like water held in a closed fist. It does nothing but sit there, and slowly it slips away, and in the end you are left with an empty, aching hand. But wealth that you give away is like water poured onto a field. It makes things grow. It brings life. It returns to you as fruit and flowers and the love of others. He looked out over the town that he had once watched so coldly and now watched with so much affection. I spent my life, he continued, thinking I was rich because of what was in my treasure room. But a man is not rich because of what he keeps. A man is truly rich because of what he gives. The gold I gave away has bought me something I could never have bought before, peace in my heart and love all around me. These are the only treasures that a man can carry with him when his time on earth is done. Seth Thunraj lived for several more happy years, and they were the best years of his whole long life. He gave, and with every gift, his heart grew lighter and his joy grew greater. And when at last his final day came, he did not die alone, surrounded only by cold gold, as he once would have. He died peacefully, surrounded by hundreds of grateful people who loved him, their faces wet with tears, their hearts full of the kindness he had finally learned to share. The whole town mourned him, not as the richest man who had ever lived, but as the kindest. And for many years afterward, parents would tell their children the story of Seth Thunraj, the greedy old man who learned, in the end, the greatest lesson of all. And that is the story of the rich man's last lesson. A story that reminds us that money kept is only metal, but money shared is love made real, and that no person is ever truly rich until they have learned the deep and lasting joy of giving.